Hello and welcome to another edition of News for English Learners. Today we're going to be talking about an article concerning Japan and its aging population and the problems that this is causing for their society. You can read along with me and you can download the text if you click on the link in the video description, and we're also going to talk about some of the important vocabulary that we find along the way. So let's begin with the first paragraph. Japan is facing a demographic crisis as its population ages and declines. For the first time ever, more than 1 in 10 people in Japan are now aged 80 years or older, according to official data. Japan has one of the lowest birth rates in the world, with fewer than 800,000 babies born last year. In contrast, the number of deaths exceeded 1 million for the 6th consecutive year. This means that Japan's population shrank by more than 200,000 people in 2022, continuing a trend that began in 2007. So, the first word we have highlighted here in the first sentence is facing. This is both a verb and a noun. In this case, in the article, it's used as a verb. The noun is, I'm sure, familiar to most of you. It is this part of your body, right? Where you have your eyes, your nose, and your mouth. This is your face. But it can also be used as a verb when we look towards something, we are facing it. For example, if you face another person, normally that means you are standing in front of them, you face them when you're talking to them. But we also use it slightly idiomatically, as in this case, when you face a problem. That means that you are not trying to hide or ignore the problem. You are actually looking at it, you're examining it, and you're trying to find a solution to that problem. So in a way, it's the opposite of, to use the idiom, burying your head in the sand. That's what we say when you try to ignore a problem. In this case, Japan is facing up to its crisis. It is looking at it, it's examining it, and it's looking for possible solutions. So let's move on to the second highlighted phrase. So we have here, in contrast. And this is a very useful phrase that we use when we are comparing two different ideas or pieces of data. In this case, it's contrasting the number of births, the number of babies born in Japan, with the number of deaths, the number of people who died. And it's a word that you may actually have come across before if you're ever adjusting the monitor of your computer or the TV. If you go to the settings, usually one of the settings there is the contrast. And if you adjust that, if you move it up or down, you will create a bigger or a lesser difference between the light and dark areas of the screen. That is what the contrast is. In this case, of course, it's used slightly more idiomatically. You're not changing an image, but you are contrasting or comparing two different ideas or bits of data. And it is often used in writing, I suppose, more than speaking, but it's definitely a phrase that I would recommend that you learn if you ever write anything in English. So let's move on to the third word. This is an irregular verb, and it's the verb to shrink. And the past is shrank, and the past participle is shrunk. The easiest way to understand this verb is if we think of a few practical examples. So the first one could be when you're cooking a piece of meat, something like a steak. When you put it in the pan, usually the heat of the pan causes the meat to shrink. In other words, it gets smaller. That is the basic meaning of this verb, to contract, to become smaller. It is the opposite of to grow. So when we talk about the economy, Sometimes the economy grows and gets bigger, and other times GDP falls, that's gross domestic product, which is the total value of goods and services in the economy. Sometimes that decreases, and we talk about the economy shrinking or contracting, getting smaller. Another example would be if you have ever washed something made of wool. That's the material, the natural material that we obtain from sheep, sometimes used to make, for example, sweaters, winter clothes. If you have ever washed those in a washing machine and the temperature has been too high, then when you take it out, you'll find that that sweater, that item of clothing, has shrunk. It has become much smaller. Let's move on to the final word in this paragraph, and that is the word trend. In this case, we can see that this word is used as a noun because we have the indefinite article here. But you will also find this word used as an adjective sometimes, and also as a verb. The adjective form is trendy. If we say that something is trendy, usually we are talking in a similar way to the word fashionable. And that is the key here to the meaning of trend. A trend is a change or development in the way people are behaving. So whenever we're talking about changes in society, we can use this word, trends. It's a word that is sometimes seen as a verb when we're talking about trending topics. And that is often associated with social media. If something is trending online, that means more and more people are finding that interesting. They are reading posts about it, and they are sharing those posts. So in this case, the trend we are talking about is the trend of Japanese deaths being greater than Japanese births. So that change in society has obviously been going on for a while, and that trend is continuing. So let's move on to the second paragraph. The aging and shrinking population poses serious challenges for Japan's economy and society. Japan has to cope with rising social security costs, labor shortages, and declining consumer demand. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida said in January that his country is on the brink of not being able to function as a society because of its declining birth rate. However, authorities remain hesitant about taking on migrant workers as a solution to falling fertility. The government has approved a record budget for the next fiscal year, partly due to increasing spending on pensions, healthcare, and welfare for the elderly. So as we see, this verb cope, which is regular, often goes with this preposition and a noun. So this is very similar to another verb, which is deal with, uses the same preposition. And we often use both of these verbs when we are talking about managing a problem or a situation, or being able to do a certain amount of work. So something that is within our ability. In this case, we are able to cope. And if you have too much work, then if you are overloaded, perhaps you would say that you can't cope. You can't deal with all of that extra work. We have two idiomatic phrases which illustrate this situation. If you are snowed under, or if you have a lot on your plate, these two idioms refer to situations where you can't cope with that amount of work. So moving on to the next word here, we have shortages. As in this case, we are talking about labor shortages. And a shortage, which is a noun, is basically any situation where there is a lack of something. There's not enough. In this case, there's not enough people of working age who can contribute to society in the form of taxes. So there's a labor shortage. The companies cannot find employees. They cannot find enough employees. We can also talk about water shortages. Right now, where I live in Spain, there is a shortage of water because for many months, in fact years, there has not been enough rain to fill the reservoirs, and therefore we are in a drought situation. There's a water shortage. So let's move on to the next word. Now, this is actually a phrase rather than a word. It's on the brink of. To be on the brink of something. Very similar to another expression, to be on the verge of. The brink is basically the edge of something or the border of something. So if you imagine something like a cliff, which is where the land meets the sea, and there's an abrupt change of level from high to low, then you can think of that. If you're standing on the edge of that cliff, on the brink of that cliff, imagine if you fell off that cliff. Obviously, there would be a sudden change in your circumstances. In this case, not a very good change. So that is basically what this phrase means. We use it when you're standing on the edge of a big change. In this case, Japan is very nearly in a situation where it's not able to function as a society because there are not enough people being born. So it is a phrase that we use quite frequently in English, so definitely worth remembering. So let's move on to the next word, and this is a phrasal verb, the phrasal verb to take on. This is basically a synonym of the non-phrasal verb to hire, and hire can be used for both vehicles, so you could hire a car, or people. Now, if I go to visit another city, if I fly there and I want to drive around, the easiest solution to that problem is to hire a car. Usually in the airport, there are places where I can do this. So hire in this sense is very similar to rent. I pay money and I can use the car for a period of time, and then I have to return the car. So you're paying for using an object. The difference between rent and hire is that hire can also be used when we're talking about people. So you can hire a person to perform a service for you. Now, if I don't have time to clean my apartment, I can hire a cleaner. And if I am a manager in a company and I need more staff, then I would hire somebody to work for me. So it's very similar to employ, to make a contract and to offer somebody a job. So that is what take on means. And in this case, in the article, it's referring to the reluctance of the Japanese authorities to take on more migrant workers, so that is workers from foreign countries, as a solution to their falling fertility rate. Now, this is a solution that many countries, particularly in Europe, have adopted to their declining birth rates, because declining birth rate is a problem of many, if not most, developed countries. The usual solution is simply to allow people from other countries who want to come and work, but in this case, in Japan, they have chosen so far not to do that. So finally, we have this word here, budget. It is used as a noun here, but can also sometimes be used as a verb. So a budget is essentially an amount of money that is set aside, reserved for a particular purpose. All governments in the world have a budget. In certain periods of the year, which can vary from country to country, the government will set out how it's going to spend the money that it raises from taxes, and indeed where it's going to get that money from. This is the budget. Sometimes individuals also can make a budget if they want to control how much they are spending on different things like food or travel expenses and other things like that. In this case, it's saying that the Japanese government's budget has increased dramatically in order to pay for all of those things that are necessary for an aging population. Moving on to the next paragraph. Japan has to come up with ways to support its elderly population, especially those who live alone or in rural areas. The government has been trying to address the issues of aging and depopulation by promoting policies such as raising the retirement age, encouraging women's participation in the workforce, increasing childcare support, and attracting more foreign workers. However, these measures have not been enough, and some experts have suggested that Japan needs to adopt a more comprehensive and long-term strategy to tackle its demographic challenges. So we are beginning this paragraph with another phrasal verb. This is the phrasal verb, the three-part phrasal verb come up with. And like all three-part phrasal verbs, this is inseparable. So the noun that we use with this must come after with. Now, we often use this when we are facing a problem or an issue, and we need to get ideas, we need to generate ideas in order to find solutions. Perhaps I am an advertising executive and my job is to come up with new ideas for promoting a particular product. One of the ways that people often do this in organizations is to have a brainstorming session. So that means people sit around in a meeting and they just say the first thing that comes into their mind as a potential idea or solution. And you write all of those ideas down, and then later you go through a process where you discard some of the ones that perhaps are not viable, and you prioritize the ones that could be good ideas. And in this case, of course, the government has to generate a solution to supporting its elderly population. Because obviously supporting an elderly population is very costly. It costs a lot of money to do that. Finally, come up with can also sometimes be used as a synonym for being able to produce something. So imagine that you have an unplanned expense in your life, then you would have to come up with the money. You'd have to, in some way, find that money and produce that money. So moving on to the second word, we have this adverb, especially. I think the most important point about this is to differentiate it from the other adverb, specially, because it often generates confusion. They are very similar. It's only one letter difference in the spelling, but the meaning is distinct. So if we start with this adverb, especially, I mean, we can see in this sentence, what we're doing here with this adverb is highlighting a particular group of the elderly. It says, especially those people, those elderly people who live alone or in rural areas. So it's highlighting that subgroup. And that is essentially what especially is used for. It is used for highlighting something, to draw attention to it. So I may say that I like playing many sports, but I especially enjoy playing cricket. That means that cricket is my favorite sport among others that I also enjoy. Now, if we contrast that, if we compare it with specially, we can see they are distinct, because specially is an adverb that is often used to say that something is different from the normal. If we think of a few examples, it may help to clarify. So if I go to the supermarket and I need to buy some shampoo, I might just buy any shampoo if I don't care. But if I have a particular problem with my hair, perhaps my hair is too dry or it's too greasy or it's a particular color, perhaps it's curly or straight, sometimes I want to buy a shampoo that has been specially formulated for that particular kind of hair. So it's not regular shampoo, it's something a little different, probably more expensive. Also, sometimes people, usually people with a lot of money, would prefer to buy specially designed clothes. not the regular clothes that you can buy in any shop in the high street, but perhaps clothes that are specially designed, perhaps by a famous designer. And again, usually these are more expensive. If a person is in a wheelchair, perhaps they can't use their legs or some other part of their body, but they want to drive a car, that is possible, but it's not possible in a normal car. It has to be a specially adapted car, so that if they can't use their legs, perhaps they can control the car only with their arms and hands. So hopefully you can see therefore the difference between those. Especially is like particularly. It's used for highlighting something. And specially means not normal. It's different in some way. So the next word we have here is the verb to address. You may be familiar with this word as a noun, of course. Your address is the number and the name of the street in the town where you have your home, where you have your house, the place where you live. But it is also used quite often as a verb. When you address an issue or a problem, it means you're directing your attention towards that. You're not ignoring it. So in some way, it's similar to the previous verb we had, to face a problem or an issue. You may also see this verb used sometimes when somebody is directing a speech to a particular person or group of people. You may hear the president is about to address the nation. So moving on to the next word, we have promoting. So this word has a couple of different uses. For example, the verb to promote, which is a regular verb, is often used in business when somebody is performing their job very well and they apply for a position that is perhaps higher in the hierarchy of the company, maybe with a higher salary and more responsibility. Then we say they have been promoted. You can also promote a product. Usually, the typical way that companies promote their products is through advertising, perhaps on social media, or also in the traditional way of placing adverts in the street or on TV. Then you're promoting a product. You're trying to get people, the public, to see your product, to become aware of your product, and to be interested in it. And in a similar way here, the government of Japan has been promoting, publicizing its policies, such as encouraging women's participation in the workforce in order to address those issues we mentioned. So moving on to the next word, this is the verb to encourage, another regular verb. And when we encourage somebody to do something, we are essentially trying to persuade them that it's a good idea. So we often do this when another person is perhaps a little bit reluctant. Reluctant is the opposite of enthusiastic. So if a friend of mine is a little bit reluctant to do something, let's say they are overweight, but they want to get fitter. So as a friend, I want to encourage them to go to the gym or to take up a new sport in order to achieve their objective. So I tell them all the benefits of this. I will tell them that they will feel better, they will have more energy, they'll lose weight. I'm encouraging them to go to the gym. In this case, one of the policies of Japan is to encourage women to participate in the workforce. So it's going to promote all the benefits that they will receive if they gain employment. So finally, we have the verb to tackle. This is another regular verb, and this is most commonly seen with reference to sports, certain sports like football or rugby. And in those sports, the objective is to get the ball from your opponent. And the way you do that is by tackling them. In football, you can only use your legs. And in rugby, of course, you can tackle your opponent with your full body. So essentially, that's what it means, but it is also used idiomatically, as in this case. Think of the ball as representing the challenge, the demographic challenge. So the government is trying to get that ball, is trying to pick up that ball and run with it like you would in sport, but obviously not literally. What it's trying to do is to address that issue, that challenge, and to come up with potential solutions for it. It's not trying to ignore it, it's trying to do something about it. So that's it for today's video. We've reached the end. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you have learned some new words. If you have, don't forget to subscribe and click like, and I'll see you again next time.